Yep. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Novio's Bistro's virtual cooking class with Chef Evan Mallett from the Black Trumpet in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Real quickly, just a couple introductions. Chef is wearing a chef's coat and just waved. And Sigrid is joining us from Easterly Wine to talk about the wine. And on my screen, on the far left top, is Aisha Veer. She's going to help moderate and keep us on schedule and task. One big thing she'll be doing is monitoring the chat. If you have any questions at any time, please just drop those right into the chat. If you unmute and try to jump into the conversation, it gets a little wonky and funny and everything else, and it's hard to stay on. But I promise if you ask a question there, Aisha will see it. She'll jump in and make sure your question gets answered right away. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Chef Evan Mallett from the Black Trumpet. In our marketing, Chef, I apologize. I said you were a 3-time semifinalist for the James Beard Award. I lied. You are a 6-time nominee. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
And you
It's
said
twice
earlier
as how you marketed it, but it's all good. It's all good. I'm still a bridesmaid, no matter how you slice it.
And then you also told me today that you were on the 2020 short list for the best hospitality in the country, which
right, which has nothing to do with me, but I'm 10 times more proud of it than I am any of the Best Chef Northeast nods that I've had. It's a tribute to our staff, their dedication, passion, longevity, and it really is, I think, one of the reasons to dine at Black Trumpet. As much as I'd love to say it's the food, the experience is really delivered by people who are deeply passionate about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that hospitality award was a big deal, but for whatever reason, people seem to care more about the chef accolades than about that.
I have often said that your restaurant and you in particular are my favorite restaurant and my favorite chef in New England by far.
Thank you.
I just took our kitchen team down to Black Trumpet for a little overnight to Portsmouth, and the highlight was dining at your restaurant. And if you haven't been, we'll talk more about Black Trumpet in Portsmouth in general later. But if you haven't gone, book it now. It is such an amazing town and restaurant and experience, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So right now, Chef, I believe everyone should have their meatball portioned and ready to go, and also their vegetables, peppers, and everything else cut. If anyone doesn't have that done, can I get a show of hands if it's not done? I know there's one person that's cooking tomorrow. She's on the call today there you go, Miss Beauregard. But everyone else, I think, is cooking along with us. So this will be a lot of fun.
Bob, if I can interrupt, just for clarification, I believe you are recording all of this, right? So for those who are wanting to make this recipe later, they'll have a chance to reference the video later.
Yes, and we'll put it up on our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Great.
And because we are recording, if you don't want your face shown, please just hide underneath your counter or just turn off your screen, whatever's easier for you.
Except I don't have the luxury of doing that, so I'm gonna have to have my face on the screen, apparently. Unless I go like this the whole time.
There you go. Have your square next to my square, and you just look better.
Well done. All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining. I don't know if you're all in the same time zone, but it's 7 o'clock here, and I'm really looking forward to making some market kefta. The recipe in my book that you may be looking at or have looked at is called market kefta, and it was one of the recipes that appeared on our early menus at Black Trumpet. Black Trumpet has been around for almost 16 years. On the Ides of March, we will turn 16, and we've seen a lot of things and cooked a lot in that time. My book is based on breaking the year down into 8 different sort of micro seasons that capture our New England ingredients in the peak of their availability and ripeness. And so it's called Chef's Journey Through 8 New England Seasons. And so Bob and I selected the market kefta, which happens to fall during this season of the year. And it's basically like a hybrid of spaghetti and meatballs, or comfort food, and like Israeli shakshuka. The recipe for the meatballs that you are using is called Moorish meatballs, which is a tribute to the Moroccan spices during the time when the Moors invaded Spain and occupied it. A lot of the influence of the spices from the Maghreb region of North Africa influenced the cuisine of Spain. And that era, to me, is just a really important chapter in culinary history that I draw from a lot. Loving Spanish food as I do, but also a lot of the more exotic North African ingredients. So this dish is a nice hybrid of that. But before we get started on the technical side of things, I do want to point out that one right after the other in this book, we actually can reference 3 different meatball recipes. And you can substitute the kinds of meat in those, but for the most part, any of those can be used to make the market kefta that we're doing today, or whatever your favorite meatball dish is. And then one other thing I want to say, just to sort of isolate or differentiate the meatballs that we make here at Black Trumpet from others that you may have grown up with. If you have an Italian heritage or a Swedish heritage, you may be more familiar with like a sort of breadier meatball, and not to disparage any of those cultures or recipes, but to me, a meatball should be meat first and filler second. So ours has very little, relatively speaking, of the egg and breadcrumb. It's the way I approach crab cakes too, and it's a way of sort of bringing out the flavor of what's in there rather than trying to stretch it as far as you can. There are times economically when it makes sense to stretch things like that, but if you're in a position to be able to really highlight the meat in the dish, that's what we want to do. So without further ado, the first step in the process of the meatballs you've all made, and I think Bob already made this point, but I have all of the mise en place, which is our fancy word for ingredients to make the meatballs, but I have already taken, as I think you have, the time to pre-make what we call the farce, so the meatball dough, as it were, and so we've done that, and so I'm not going to go through the process of cutting all of the things. If you had questions about the prep for the meatballs, now would be a good time to put those questions in the chat. If there was anything that you came across that wasn't available and you had to make substitutions, or you have questions about those substitutions, I would be very happy to address those concerns or issues. But as far as the class part of the program goes, I'm going to start into the prep for the kefta, at which time I think it would be wonderful to introduce Sigrid Coffin and her wine expertise, maybe to talk a little bit about the wine that's featured in your kit and how she chose it to pair with this dish. So I'll start cutting some of the vegetables that are in your recipe, and hopefully you all can see me and my cutting board.
Chef, we have a question really quickly. Someone is wondering what kind of pan or pans they need, cast iron in particular, or anything special. I think you're muted.
Evan, Chef, you're muted.
That was a self-muting computer. And this is a tour, by the way. We're in the Black Trumpet kitchen right now, which is probably not much larger than your kitchen. In fact, a lot of home kitchens are larger. But I do want to show you our cast iron shelf because I don't know if you can see that. Can you see all the cast iron pans?
Yes.
So the top shelf there, those are all cast iron pans that were donated to my kitchen by Lodge, which is the oldest producer of cast iron pans in the United States. When I was on a national NPR program, and I know better now, I know that I should do this more often, but I inadvertently credited Lodge with being the best nonstick surface known to man, and then like got a 500-pound box in the mail about a week later full of cast iron pans. So now I'm sort of this unpaid voice for Lodge pans. So when you're asking me what pan, I'm not contracted by them to tell you this, but I am an advocate of Lodge cast iron pans as long as you keep them well seasoned. Okay, good question. And if you don't have a cast iron pan, any sort of carbon steel pan would be good. But those meatballs are going to stick to a pan that's not properly seasoned.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Chef. Sigrid, how are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. I'm thrilled to be here tonight and doing this particular dish. And I had the honor of working with Chef Evan Mallett when he had a restaurant in Belfast, which is nearby where I am, called Ondine. If you had a chance to go there while he was up there, it was spectacular and a true gift to the community, and we were very sorry to see it go. So I'm excited to be working with him again, and I'm really happy to have everybody here tonight. Thank you so much for joining and for doing this. This is really cool. And the wine that we're drinking tonight is the Renard, and this is the Coteau Bourguignon, and this is from Chateau de Veillard, and this is a blend of Pinot Noir and Gamay. And this is from the area where you would find the higher Pinot Noirs in France, Burgundy. But because there's Gamay in it, they can't call it Burgundy. So there's a little bit of a sort of sidestepping that. They call it Coteau Bourguignon, which literally means hills of Burgundy. And it's just a designation saying that this is a choice from the chateau, from the domain, to incorporate Gamay into this wine. You can't call it Burgundy if it has Gamay in it. And so they call it Coteau Bourguignon. And this is a fairly new appellation designation. So this came to be in about 2011, so really quite current, where so many winemakers wanted to be able to grow other grapes than Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and still have wine from Burgundy. And because of the very strict laws there, they finally came up with this sort of compromise, if you will, this designation called Coteau Bourguignon. So I think it's a really interesting, this sort of leniency on the behalf of the French government and winemakers to come up with a totally different appellation name, so that we can enjoy these wines that aren't, specifically 2,000-year-old tradition of Burgundy and Chardonnay. So this particular house is a very old house that has four different domains, and this is sort of their entry-level wine. So this is coming from, they have over 50 plots up and down the Côte d'Or, and this is coming from mostly from right about in the center, in the Côte Chalonnaise. So this is about 50-50 Pinot Noir and Gamay. And the reason I wanted to do this wine tonight, looking at this recipe, is I wanted to do something red. It's cold out, it's wintertime. This is meatballs, it's comfort food, it's delicious, but there's so many flavors going on in this. There's 4 different kinds of peppers. There's Urfa chili, there's serrano, there's preserved lemon, there's fennel, there's just so many different mint, and these are all things that are classically kind of challenging to pair with. Oh, and then you're throwing an egg at the end. Egg and mint and tomato, I would say, are all pretty hard to pair with wine. So I wanted to do something that was not too full-bodied. I didn't want something that was going to overpower all these flavors that are working together. I did not want to do something with any oak in it. Oak is a pretty dominant flavor, and even with all these delicacies, it could definitely sort of tarnish what we're trying to do, which is pair the food and wine together. And I wanted to do something that wasn't super heavy, but I thought Pinot Noir would be too light. And the most important thing was I needed something with some acidity, because this has some richness to it and some complexity, and I didn't want the wine to fall flat in comparison with this food. So I'm hoping you've already had a sip of this, but if you haven't, we can open it up now and try it. You can see from the color, I'm kind of holding it up here, it's not super heavy. You can see in the background, you can also see my cat in the background, I just realized. But behind, right in front of Tahini is you can see this sort of ruby color. It has a little bit of clarity around the rim of the glass, the edges of the wine. So I know it's not going to be super heavy. I also know it's not going to be super old. So this is not a particularly long aged wine. This is 2019. Lovely red sort of fruit on the nose. If you've had the Urfa chili in the past, which is in the meatballs, it calls for a fair amount actually. Well, a pinch, which it has a lot of sort of sweetness to the chili too. So this sort of, to me,
And
feels
a
like
light
that.
smokiness, Sigrid, if I can jump in. That's
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
distinct quality. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I wanted, something that this has this red fruit that would complement that really well. Spice and tannin are oil and water. If you have anything with too much tannins and too much heat, it's just going to char your tongue. It just really, you want something with acidity and some fruit that sort of calms and cools the palate. So lovely red fruit on the nose. It's light, but it's got so much present fruit. The acidity, the tannins are very, very, very mild in the back, and the acidity really sings across all of them, which I think this complements all of those flavors. You don't want, I mean, there's again so much going on, but between tomato and there's some orange in here too, which I just realized. So if you can imagine having something that was heavy and oaky with this, it would really kind of mask all these flavors. So this is the pairing I chose, the Renard, which means the fox.
That's really delicious, Sigrid. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's any questions on any of the wine or wine in general, I'm here for a little while. I have to hop off soon, but.
Well, I really appreciate the pairing and totally agree that it's, I set you up for failure with all of these flavors. So,
except that's why I love my job, is when I see 19 different flavor profiles and I go, oh, what do we get to do?
And as you always have, you roast. Everyone should have something on their cutting board that looks a little bit like this. That is all of our peppers, our fennel, and garlic, and preserved lemon. Before this hits the pan, which is our next step, I do want to actually let me put it in the pan and get it going just to make sure.
Chef, if I can jump in real quick.
Yeah.
We didn't have preserved lemon, so we were going to do lemon zest with that.
I was about to talk about that, but I want to sort of get everything fired up first. Yeah. This is a fancy squirt bottle that we use in the kitchen, full of something in my cookbook that's in the very beginning. It's sort of a foundation of all that we cook. And it's called CBOOB, which stands for Clarified Butter Olive Oil Blend. So that's what we're going to be sweating, the least glamorous of all culinary verbs. We'll be sweating these vegetables in that fat. And by all means, everyone can feel free to scale back on the chili peppers if you don't like the heat. I know the saying is you're supposed to get out of the kitchen, but I would say just cut back on the chili pepper. I'm gonna try to restrict my dad jokes after that. So it does say to add a little bit of salt. There's a scientific reason for adding salt at this phase, and then we'll add more salt later to adjust. But right now we want to help those vegetables not stick to the pan and release some of their moisture as they're sauteing over a fairly low flame. So I'm going to get that up and running while I tell you a little bit about preserved lemon. So here at Black Trumpet, we traditionally preserve our own lemons. And right now we've actually got preserved grapefruit and preserved citron in-house. In order to do that, and there's a recipe in the very beginning of my book, I think it's like page 12 or somewhere around there, we cut a lemon almost all the way through into quarters, but leaving them connected at the bottom. And then we make a flour out of it basically and stuff the lemon flour with kosher salt and then close it back up and then put it into a container with lots of other lemons so that they're all sort of forced to stay closed, and then cover the whole thing with water, put it in a fridge, or you can even leave it at room temperature for months. After about 3 weeks, typically, the skins have softened and become completely saturated with salt water and cured. That's also a process that leaches some of the bitterness of the pith of the lemon out. But what I want to talk to Bob about, and Bob, since you're unmuted, you can even respond if you like. This container is like a few years after doing preserved lemons, and I became very obsessed with food waste and how egregious food waste is in the restaurant industry. I realized that we're constantly juicing lemons that we haven't zested. So we're left with a perfectly good skin with the zest intact of a lemon that we would otherwise throw out or compost as we do here. But that is a preservable ingredient. And if you have a bar that goes through a lot of lemons for juicing, you can preserve any citrus. So we've done it with limes, oranges, as I mentioned, grapefruit, citron. And it's a really great way to ensure that you're utilizing everything and reutilizing things whenever possible. So this container here is actually preserved lemons that were left over from juicing at the bar. And we just pour salt in them and cram them into a container, cover it with water and forget about them for a while. So that is a preserved lemon. If you need a fast track to preserved lemons for a recipe that you're gonna make that same day, for example, one thing you can do is to make salt water that's basically of the same salinity as the ocean, and cut the rinds off of the lemons and boil them in that water for a couple of changes of that water to leach out as much bitterness as you can, and then have a finished product that is not exactly the same, but as close as you're going to get to a preserved lemon. So that technique is a good day of solution. But since we're all here and probably don't have preserved lemons on hand, I'm going to recommend that you just zest some lemons and then adjust your salt accordingly in the finished product. So zesting lemons. Sorry,
just to clarify, Chef, how much lemon zest should participants have ready for the recipe?
Yeah, a single lemon is probably fine. We're only feeding 2 people each tonight. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so a single lemon is fine.
That's
All right,
interesting.
so
We compost our used lemons that we use for juicing and zesting and everything else at the bar. But we'll start doing preserves, because I feel like that's something the kitchen could end up using, a better way to use our scraps than just composting it. Thank you.
Bob, we have a lot of cross-pollination between the kitchen and the bar with ingredients that are in season that we are able to process and keep for longer periods of time for the bar. And as someone who produces bitters, that there are lots of botanicals that you can use to create bittering, and citrus is certainly one of those too. So we use it for that purpose as well.
Absolutely.
So we're starting to get some heat in this pan, and it's okay if the pan is a little bit taller because you want there to be, a certain depth to your vegetables. I've also kept my hood vent almost off. It's very, very low, which means that it simulates the effect of home cooking. And so anything that you guys are feeling when it comes to like the chilies in your nose or chopping onions and wanting to cry, I'm experiencing the same thing today, where normally we have a high-speed fan that would make it a lot easier. So if I start choking, you'll know why. I also want to talk a little bit about the pepper that's on the recipe for Moorish meatballs. That pepper is called a fish pepper, and it has a really great heritage here in the United States, having been brought here from Africa about 150 years ago. And it was raised in a single community in Maryland for like over 100 years as an heirloom, and it's called the fish pepper. And we have grown it in our gardens, and the picture that's featured there is actually from our heirloom garden. It is such a delicious pepper, about the same amount of heat as a jalapeno, not as hot as a serrano, but it's got a sweetness to it. And it's called the fish pepper because it was used always in the company of fish. So we use it a lot here in the summertime, in particular when they're ripe on the plant. They do turn into a red and white striped chili, and the one that's depicted on the page in the cookbook is actually the underripe version, so similar to like a jalapeno or a serrano. So while those are sweating, and if anyone has the experience of whatever pan you're choosing, if something tonight while you're making dinner sticks to that pan, you're going to use the age-old technique with Sigurd's permission of deglazing that pan. We have this wine on hand that I know will seem like a waste when it's a delicious wine, but many, many, many years ago, the French devised the technique of deglazing, either out of laziness because they didn't want to clean the pan later, or out of genius for knowing that it's adding it's releasing the fond, as they say in France, from the bottom of the pan, which adds flavor, and the Maillard effect, which is the sort of caramelization of proteins that enhances the flavor of the finished product. So this recipe doesn't call for that, but I am giving you the full authority to deglaze the pan if things start to get a little sticky. I think we're using show of hands here since we're staying muted, but how are everyone's vegetables doing? Good. Starting to get a little soft at this point. Great.
And chef, at this point, they should have basically all of their vegetables in that, the onions, the peppers, everything else in that pan, correct?
Yeah, I think I said the first 5 ingredients. And then, so yeah, we simmer those for close to 10 minutes over medium flame. And then we're going to add the tomato the tomato and the orange and the garlic. I already added the garlic, and that's okay to add the garlic at this stage, actually. And so, yeah, pretty much every other ingredient under the kefta sauce will be added next. But if you haven't added the garlic yet, add that now. Still not quite where I need to be to add the orange juice and the tomatoes, so I'm holding off just a second. If anyone has any questions, you can ask them, or I can start rambling about Black Trumpet.
We do have one question about the fire roasted puree. They are. Go ahead, Bob.
The recipe in the book, Sean, is for 8 people. We're doing a 2-person recipe, so we portioned you out for 2 people on the puree.
And so I'll do a product placement here. This is the product that we use for fire roasted tomatoes when we don't have tomatoes in season ourselves. I also do have a cool t-shirt I want to show you, which may seem like a non sequitur, but it's very relevant. I can hear my vegetables starting to stick to the pan, so I'm going to pause for 1 second, do a little orange in there. Just a little more salt. And our tomato is going in. If anyone didn't catch that, it's Muir Glen. It's out of California, all organic fire roasted tomatoes. If you have a vegetable stock on hand or a meat stock, our dog is very fortunate to get this in her food every day. In the restaurant, we have stocks that we make in-house, but you can buy organic vegetable or meat stock to thin this out, or you can even use water if you feel like it's a little too thick. But the t-shirt I wanted to show you is right here. You may not be able to read it, but a farmer gave this to me last week because of something I said to him like 5 years ago that changed the way he thought about farming. And it says, paste tomatoes are the answer. So just a quick aside, the reason for that is that as chefs and as consumers, we know tomato season locally to basically involve a brief period of time. Hopefully, if you have a farmer's market, you know how gorgeous an heirloom tomato slicer can be. And they can be all colors, all sizes, but they exist and then they're gone. And that passes by essentially if they don't have hot houses or high tunnels in a matter of a few weeks. So my book is all about these micro seasons, and we have to honor the fact that traditionally those slicer tomatoes that are eye candy and also mouth candy, they are incredibly delicious and sweet, have an incredibly short lifespan. But on the other hand, the tomato is like one of the most important ingredients in cooking, regardless of what your background is. Tomatoes are used by pretty much every chef everywhere all year round. So for me to have a locally sourcing restaurant, it has always struck me that there's that one exception that I have to make, where in order for me to get like a rich sauce or the roasting of the bones that get coated with a tomato puree or a tomato paste, like we have to have that product. And if I could do it locally, I would. So I've been trying for now almost 2 decades to get our local farmers to raise more paste tomatoes that we can then process and have on hand year round. It takes a lot of tomatoes to get us through the year. And I've got a couple of farmers now who are raising thousands of pounds. They're growing thousands of pounds of tomatoes just for us every year. We do a lot of work with a local nonprofit, hunger relief nonprofit called Gather. I'm actually wearing their t-shirt under here because I'm a poster boy for their cause. And during the pandemic, my entire staff produced a ton of food for our local food insecure community through Gather. One of the things that we did was appeal to farmers from all over New England to bring us all of their paste tomatoes so that we could remain on brand and on mission for Black Trumpet by doing local food, but be able to use that tomato product throughout the year to make things like lasagna that we could do at scale for our community. This wasn't necessarily part of our program for today. I'm just embellishing a little bit, but I'm also about ready to stir my kefta. So depending on what your tomato product looked like, the one that I showed you was kind of chunky. The recipe does call for a puree, which is going to look more like this, which is almost, like a ketchup consistency. So I'm adding a little bit of that and just a small amount of this stock. And I know it wasn't in the recipe, so if you have, oh no, wait, it is in the recipe. It's just not until the next step.
Yep. And we gave everyone should have some stock that from our kitchen that they make weekly.
Excellent. Okay. So my bad. I didn't read ahead in my own recipe.
We had a question, Chef, a couple moments ago, and you might jump into this when you talk a little bit more about the book. But we have a participant wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you define the 8 seasons in your cookbook. Here in Maine, we usually talk about winter, mud season, summer, and fall.
Right. Yeah. So in New England, there's the saying, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute. So I was sort of operating with that as a pretext for how we source ingredients and how it's always super frustrating for chefs who want to do local food in northern New England to know that you create a menu and then a few weeks later it's done and you got to start all over again for certain ingredients. And so the way it breaks down into the 8 seasons is actually very, very simple. It's just early spring, late spring. Each of them has a subtitle in the book just to be clever, but essentially we found that when we were changing our menu at Black Trumpet, we were changing it every 6 weeks. And that broke down into 8 different menus a year. So when I was writing the book, that was an aha moment for my publisher, who was like, that's a unique perspective to look at, sourcing food for a restaurant, and also maybe something that the consumer would want to be aware of and have that sort of be their North Star. So that's how it came to be. And we still, to this day, change our menu every 6 weeks. Sometimes a holiday will be thrown in there and it's a little bit wonky. So if anyone wants to, hold me accountable, I will say there's sometimes a little wiggle room. But I think we're just about there with our liquid. So the next step is where we would take it in the restaurant. So we would have this tomato sauce prepared and shocked and chilled, and we'd have our meatballs formed. So everything we do from here on is actually how we fire the food on the line in the kitchen. So this is where you guys become actual line cooks, which all of us restaurants need right now, by the way. So if you want to apply, you know where to find me. But one thing I also wanted to point out is that when I mentioned there are different meatballs in this book, there is also a recipe immediately following the kefta for shakshuka, which is an Israeli dish that we do a sort of vegetarian, well, it's ovo-vegetarian, so it's got eggs, but semolina dumplings with it, and that's sort of at a larger scale to be done for a group of people, typically for breakfast. But you can actually take this same recipe and hybridize it with any of the meatballs and then bring a meat element into the dish. So do a shakshuka with the meatballs. There are people in Israel who would be upset if you brought a pork meatball into a shakshuka, but other than that, it's a pretty wide berth of what you can do. So I want to encourage people who have the book to think about that for parties and events down the road. So what you have now should look like this. Let me do that. So it's kind of chunky and thick. All the vegetables are soft. And if I taste it, which I have to do, right? You all have to do that too without burning your tongue. It should be a little bit spicy. Oh man. I hope you all feel the way I do right now. It's very soul warming, slightly tongue burning, but not the chilies aren't too bad in mine. It doesn't feel overly spicy. So you can adjust that accordingly. You can't make it less spicy, but you can always add a little bit more kick if you want. All right, so I've turned off the burner under that saucepan, and now it's time to transfer our attention to the stove. This is a 10 burner stove. If you have a 10 burner stove, you should have a restaurant.
We don't even have a 10 burner stove.
Yeah, I know one of the few kitchens that might rival mine for size, but you guys have a grill though, don't you?
No, we're all induction.
Ah, right. So I'm going to use a more intelligent utensil. Take just enough of the tomato and pepper sauce to cover the bottom of the skillet. And you all probably have very different pans for this. This is what we do in the restaurant for the market kefta. But I'm gonna, wait, I just totally screwed up. We haven't seared the meatballs. Everybody,
I was going to say, are we?
I've made this like 5,000 times. It's really crazy that I forgot that. All right, so now we're gonna get the pan hot. I'm gonna drop a little more oil in there.
And chef, you're using your lodge pan for this, right? What you're going to use for the final presentations, what you're using to brown in?
Exactly right. Yeah, and we actually serve it in that same pan, so everything stays nice and hot. And at this time of year, we want people to have that that fulfillment of eating the super hot, bubbly sauce. So that's the presentation. I also made bread yesterday. I'm the baker every other Sunday in my restaurant. So this recipe doesn't necessarily call for bread, but if you have some stale baguette kicking around, or perhaps a hard cider current sourdough, you could use that. It's good for dipping at the end. These are my meatballs. And they're about an ounce a piece, but we use a little ice cream scoop. You can find these in a lot of kitchen supply stores. And it's really easy if you have a bowl full of the farce or the meatball mix to then just like sort of press it into this and dump it out. And then you can hand roll it later, or you can do it at this, as part of the same process. But this really makes it go faster. And it ensures that you'll have a consistent size. So all of mine are just about the same size. Depending on how many people you're feeding, you could do a larger cast iron pan or multiple cast iron pans this size. And now that my pan is a little bit hot, I'm going to drop in my 3 meatballs. Actually, you guys are doing for 2 people, so I'll do the same thing. I now have 6 meatballs in my pan. And we're going to have it over pretty high heat and just rotate them frequently. So we know that they're getting evenly browned on all sides. My kitchen looks out the window at the street and then the river, the Piscataqua River, which is the mouth of it is right outside my restaurant. And occasionally when we're cooking, people will stop at the window and poke their heads in, and it's kind of it's like its own marketing. But right now there are 2 people at the window who can't come in, and that's probably bad marketing. Because I can't do anything to help them right now. So these are gonna be nice and brown on all sides, not burned. We don't burn. Chefs don't burn. They over caramelize.
I love that. We're gonna use that one.
So if you have a good amount of lamb in your meatballs or goat that tends to be higher in fat, now is a good time with your rendered, your meatballs with all that fat that's in there to just dump some of it out. And leave just a little bit left in there. And if you're doing it right over the right heat with the right pan, your meatballs should not be sticking. And I don't know about anyone else, but I'm really close now to putting that sauce in. Depending on how you want your presentation, you can just pour the sauce over the top, or you can take the meatballs out, put the sauce in, and replace the meatballs back on top.
Chef, when you're pouring the sauce in,
Sorry, Bob?
when you pour the sauce in, are you keeping the heat on it, or have you turned the heat off?
I turned the heat down. The heat is turned down.
All right.
And then we're adding the stock because it's going to evaporate as it cooks. depending on the size of your pan, you might be able to do more than one egg. In this pan, I'm only going to have room for one. So I've made a well in the middle. Again, it's not a high flame. We're on a pretty low flame right now, but it's bubbling quite a bit. So it's time to drop the egg in. And then we're going to finish it with a little bit of salt on top. Basically just salting the egg because everything else is pretty well seasoned. And I'm going to simmer that on the stove for a little over a minute and let that bottom part of the egg start to set. And then our oven should be preheated. Hopefully everyone got that memo.
Emily, the meatballs should only be browned. You're not worried about cooking them through at this point. They'll cook through in the oven.
About another 30 seconds or so on top of the stove, and then we're going in the oven. People should be seeing the white of the egg starting to turn white around the periphery of the pan. Okay, we're going in now. And that's going to be about 4 to 7 minutes, depending on your oven temperature. I noticed that people were preheating to 425. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chef.
Okay, so I think that's a little hotter than the recipe calls for, but no, you're right. Yep, yeah. You've done it. Yep, you've done it right. Great. So on the line in the kitchen, we'll keep the stoves typically around 450, so we would adjust our time accordingly. But yeah, 425 should be good. And lots of things you can do to adjust at this point. If your favorite meatball dish from childhood involved cheese, when you take it out of the oven, you could do some grated cheese on top of it. The egg is already pretty rich, so for me, that's enough. But some people really like to have a sort of cheesy component with their meatballs. Seeing a reference to Dr. J that I don't understand, but I haven't read the pretext.
It's Dr. Ryan Jeffrey asked a question, so it's just easier for me to type Dr. J than Jeffrey.
Got it. I thought maybe it was Julius Erving.
He is exactly the opposite of Julius Erving, and that's actually, now I may just call him Dr. J for now on, just for that.
Good. I'm actually now seeing a lot of the comments.
Chef, a couple questions. Where do you, in Portsmouth, I'm not sure how many people have been to Portsmouth or anything else, but where do you buy most of your spices, your ingredients, I know you have a full kitchen, you're doing your stocks in your kitchen, from, I'm sure, bones left over from, whatever, and vegetable scraps and everything else, but where do you buy a lot of your spices and such like that down in Portsmouth?
So the answer that isn't helpful is that I get a lot of things through Provisions International, which is based out of White River Junction, Vermont, and they're a really great importer of some harder to find ingredients. But when it comes to spices in particular, we have the really convenient benefit of having a spice shop directly next door to Black Trumpet. And it's actually one that my wife and I opened about a decade into Black Trumpet. And it was her idea. We were on a trip in France and had some really amazing spices in a market and smuggled them back, and then didn't really have an outlet to share them with the world outside of Black Trumpet. So we started this business model, and very soon had Stock and Spice, which you can order from online. And we owned it for about 5 years and then sold it to our general manager, who is a longtime employee. And Paula is now the proprietor and has done a way better job with the shop than we ever did. So if you're in Portsmouth and it's daytime, Black Trumpet's not open yet, you should definitely duck in next door and check out some of the cool spice blends. When I say they're cool, that's self-laudatory because most of them are mine, but they came from like super intense geekdom of curiosity about world travel, about cultures, and how different foods are accented by spice all around the world. So you really do find something from everywhere there, and a lot of the spices that I called for in this recipe today can be found over there.
Aisha just dropped that website into the chat as well, Chef.
Awesome.
And I queued that up for you because I didn't realize you had sold that. So I queued it up as a free commercial for your own thing. And
you know what? We want to see her succeed. She worked so hard to make it what it is. And we're really glad that she's able to carry it on and improve upon it. And it's, one less thing for us to worry about. So it's a win for everybody.
Excellent. And so Emily dropped a question in. What are some of your favorite Maine restaurants besides Novio's, of course? She said,
of course.
Well, I'm assuming we're in your top 20 on your list, but
well, Novio's is actually 1 through 20. So if we want to jump to 21, I do have like some very old school standbys that I love. 4th Street being right at the top of that list. I feel like Sam Hayward, who is a close friend of mine and longtime guru of mine. We do a program together out on the Isles of Shoals right offshore here in New Hampshire. That's an eco-culinary weekend where people get to forage with us and cook with us. It's a 3-day program that we do every summer. And so I've gotten to know him really well and understand the really, really beautiful thing that he's been able to do with Maine cuisine in the last 20, I think it's 27 or 28 years of 4th Street's existence. And, he was truly the godfather of Maine cuisine long before Portland had any buzz about restaurants. And I think everyone sort of owes a debt to him for having created that foundation. So that's just one long answer for a single place. I had a really killer meal at Leeward recently, also in Portland. There's a ton of really cool stuff happening in Saco and Biddeford right now. A lot of chefs who are getting national recognition there. And of course, I opened a restaurant in Belfast because of my love of Mid-Coast Maine. So, any of the places that have opened in recent years in Camden, Rockport, and I'm sure everyone's been to Primo. So as long as Primo is still around, that's right at the top of my list as well.
Yeah, Melissa's a wizard. She's amazing.
She is. She and I are almost the exact same age, and I feel like she's had 2 careers for my one.
Any other questions for Chef Mallett while we're
getting really close? I don't know about everyone else, but
yeah.
My egg, you still see it's got a little jiggle. So it's really close, like less than a minute.
So we're really going for over easy on that egg, and that's going to tell us it's cooked through. Is that correct?
Like a perfectly poached egg. It should have a nice runny yolk, not be totally set up. The trick of that is serving it right away, because the longer it sits, the longer it's going to carry over. So if you want, you can pull it now and let it hang out so that it doesn't scald people's mouths while the egg is perfect.
And that's why you're doing the 1 ounce, the smaller meatball, because it can cook by just browning and then finishing in the oven for this 5-7 minutes. That will be enough to cook that meatball through with only 1 ounce.
That was very intuitive, Bob. You are correct.
Yeah. See how I do that? I answer my own question while I'm asking it.
No, you nailed it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna take it out now. Just putting it up on the stove top to let it cool just a little. I actually think the one I just made looks better than the one in the book. We had to do 270 recipes in this kitchen in a 6-month period when we were writing the book, and you know, everything was completely homemade. My photographer was a friend who has gone on to have a very successful chocolate company called Enna Chocolate. She sources all of her ingredients after touring the plantations where the cacao is harvested, fermented, and turned into what she begins with to make her couverture. So she's a rock star in the chocolate world. And if you're ever driving by Exeter, New Hampshire, there's some great restaurants there, but also her chocolate shop, which will not disappoint. I speak from some authority, having just returned from Oaxaca, one of the world's chocolate capitals, and had some pretty great chocolate while I was there, but one of her chocolates actually is from the region that I was visiting.
Heather, I just saw your note. If it's not cooked, keep in mind, even when you take it out, because that sauce and that pan is so hot, that egg will continue cooking
Right.
in that pan. So as it's working itself, it will continue cooking. It's kind of like eggs and pancakes. They keep cooking. What was the name of the chocolate place in Exeter again, Chef?
Enna Chocolate, ENNA. And as you flip through the book, all of those photographs, this was her first career was as a photographer, and she specialized in portraiture. So this was her first food photography foray, and I'm just blown away as I look through this, you know, which I haven't done in a little while, but just some incredible use of light and capturing the moment in our kitchen. Just super impressive to me.
I have to tell you, page 83 may be one of my favorite things to look at all the time. I'm just always like, oh, I just want to shirt every time.
Yeah, it's like the sort of gossamer texture of the orange, and
Yeah, the meringue.
yeah, you're right. You're right. That makes you want to eat it right now.
Well done.
Well, that's all Anna, but I'll tell her you said so.
Yeah. Real quickly, can we talk a little bit more about Portsmouth while our dish is cooling? And then feel free to start eating and drinking, you know, continuously. If you have questions, just drop in.
Eating and drinking continuously sounds like a good agenda to me for pretty much anytime, anywhere.
Chef, so you Black Trumpet you've had for how long? I'm sorry.
Almost 16 years. And I was the chef of the previous restaurant in this location for 4 years before we bought it from the owners. So I've been cooking in this kitchen now for 20 years, which is in chef years, or in human years, that's like 70 or something like that.
Yeah,
it works like dogs, right?
You must have the most comfortable pair of shoes ever to, you know, chef for 20 years in the same kitchen.
I don't think that was a serious question, but
no, it is.
I will answer it by saying that when we opened On Dean, there was this promotion that Crocs did for restaurants that we signed up for, and all we had to do was like have people post pictures of themselves wearing Crocs for a few months, and they sent us like 100 pairs. So I'm actually still going through those 5 years later, and I swear by them. You know, Mario Batali may have started it, but I'm going to be the one who perpetuates it.
My feet are constantly killing me. I sound like an old man right now. I like just on your feet all day, hard surfaces and all that walking.
Yep.
It's tough, you know.
It is tough. Standing still is even harder. And if you keep your knees locked, like a lot of people do, it causes all kinds of back anguish. And, you know, I mean, I encourage all chefs and restaurant employees to have an active lifestyle away from the restaurant. And of course, you know, any of us who have really been in the trenches know how hard that is to do. But I do think it's really important to have exercise as part of your daily routine in some capacity.
I I preach the same thing to my team: mental wellness and drinking water and getting rest and waking up early. Don't sleep all night or don't sleep all day, and have a full and balanced life.
I think the lifestyle that paints us in the wrong light has come about because we all are naturally wired when we get home at the end of a long shift. And now that I'm older, I can actually go to bed when I get home. But I remember, like, when I was younger, just for an hour and a half after working, I couldn't go to sleep. And I think that just invites all sorts of other activities. So that's one of the problems for sure.
Yeah, that's what I do now. I just go home and watch Mary Tyler Moore shows. It's good. It's,
you might be the only person in America watching her show now. I was a fan as a child, but that's amazing to me, Bob.
It doesn't stress me out. It's easy. So Emily asked a question: what recipes in the book should we try next?
Well, now that you've mastered the kefta, like I said, you can play around with the dumplings, the semolina dumplings, and all the other ways to incorporate meatballs into a dish. And then, some of these have a higher degree of difficulty, but depending on the time of year. So right now we are thinking about like heavier foods, meatier foods, and maybe less of the fresh produce that is available. So one of my favorites actually in the whole book is on page 75. It's also from this season, and it's a winter root veggie pot pie. So if you don't want to make your own puff pastry, that's something you can buy, or you could use any other sort of, pastry on it. But I really love that dish. At this time of year, it's vegetarian, but it feels like you're eating like a heavy meat dish. So it's super filling and rich, and just fresh and delicious at the same time. So there's that. And then I also love borscht at this time of year. So we have a lot of farms that still have storage cabbage. If you're not Polish or Ukrainian, you may not have an appreciation for borscht. I don't know where mine comes from. It must be part of my DNA that I don't know about, but I love borscht at this time of year. I feel like it gives me power. It's like the most amazing, this combination of sweet and acid and umami, the depth of the flavor of the meat in it with the rich earthiness of the beets. Like it's just this all-encompassing dish. So you find a recipe which gives you a couple of options. The recipe on 81, and I already praised Enna a lot, but it kind of looks like a bowl full of ketchup. But you can also not puree it and have all the chunks of carrots and root vegetables and cabbage still in there. And on that same note, the reason I have an appreciation for borscht at all was a lot of late nights in New York City when I was pretty young, finding a place in the East Village that is called Veselka. Veselka is a Ukrainian restaurant that's open, I think 24 hours, or else maybe it just opens really late. But regardless, it is a really incredible borscht dining experience. You can get the white borscht or the red borscht, and they're both great. But that red borscht that I first tasted there, to me, was like this panacea. It was just this solution to all of my woes. And at this time of year, we all need that. So that's my sales pitch for borscht. And I'll just tag on to the end of that statement that Veselka just received its first nod from the James Beard Foundation for Best Restaurant in America. It's a dive. It's like a diner, but it deserves to be on that list. Oh, I see someone is already eating. That's great. I'm really, really curious to know, and I know Sigrid is not on the call, but I think she picked a really cool wine, and I want to see if anyone has tried those two together, and and what your thoughts are. I'm going to do that right now. Thank you for the wine, Bob.
It's very, very nice.
Good.
Sean, how did your meal come out?
Wonderful. Very, very comforting. I love the spice, of course, and lamb is one of my favorite meats. So this is perfect.
Great.
And Chef, with the Super Bowl coming up in 2 weeks, I feel like this meal is also something. Plan ahead with your sauce.
Right.
take it, bring it down to temperature in a safe way, store it in your fridge the day before, whatever. You can do this meal at, like on the Super Bowl, if you're hosting people, easily. And this is something that people can pick at, eat, and everything else and share. Just put it in a bigger cast iron, put more meatballs and more sauce and a few more eggs.
Totally.
And it can be shared, amongst the people you choose to watch the game with.
And that's it's a really good suggestion, Bob. But I would also say that if people want to get way ahead, you can make the force meat that you roll the meatballs from, and put it in a gallon-sized Ziploc bag. Press all the air out of it, label it, and put it in your freezer. And you can roll the meatballs from that, a year later if you want to.
Yeah. Yep.
This is fun. I haven't read my book in a while.
You must sell quite a few of them out of your the front door of your
We
store.
do. It's nice. Yeah, the publisher was pretty excited that I would have my own retail outlet, and with the store next door too. Plus, all the local bookstores in town are super supportive of it, and around the holidays, stock up on it. So it's unfortunate.
Continuing my my push for everyone to leave Bangor on the weekends and not come to my restaurant and go to another. If you're down, well, if you go down to Black Trumpet, you're going to enjoy yourself. His wine list is amazing. His cocktails are great. You're going to enjoy yourself. So you're going to stay at one of the local hotels that you can walk to. We stayed at the AC Marriott. It was a simple walk. Very nice rooms. There's my pitch for Marriott. But I think we walked by the Sheraton, was right there. We walked by it on our way to ours and everything else. So a lot of options. Downtown is amazing. Super cute, super walkable. But Elephantine is maybe my favorite bakery in the US. Like, it beats everything I've been to in New York, everything I've been to in Chicago. It is amazing. And whenever any of my friends are driving through Portsmouth, I'm always like, stop and get me an almond croissant.
They're so good. They're so good.
That amazing. So you got to check out, you got to go to Portsmouth. And
I'd like to answer a question from Emily with a visual. One of the culinary secrets I talk about in my book, there's a few pieces of equipment that chefs have that people at home don't have. This is a Vitamix blender carafe. If you're familiar with the VitaPrep or Vitamix brand, it changes everything. It changes what you think about pureeing. It produces the smoothest, creamiest results, whether you're making smoothies at home or making a soup like the borscht in my book. It's just like the most powerful, incredible device, and costs 2 to 3 times as much as any other blender, but is well worth it. And they're indestructible. Although I do have 2 new dishwashers who have found ways to destroy 2 of them in the last 3 months, which is a personal record for us. But anyway, other than having gorillas in the dish pit, you are probably good to have this VitaPrep for life. That is my sales pitch.
is there any other questions about this recipe, the wine, or a couple more other messages maybe? Emily said thank you.
I like Heather's message.
Yes.
Go Heather.
And earlier she said that her husband doesn't think she can cook, so all we got to do is give her 60 more things to cook and she's all set.
Well, there's 269 more recipes in my book, Heather. You can make almost a whole year out of it.
I'll also say, like, one thing that really goes a long way in helping is when you cut your vegetables, cutting them all in the same size helps everything cook evenly and helps the flavor move through evenly through your process. I feel like that's something home chefs don't always do well or think about doing is that consistent, even cuts.
It sure does help. Absolutely.
Sean, wine can be ordered into Stompers. It's also available at the bistro for retail.
Would you have this as a glass pour, Bob? I don't know about the pricing on it.
We wouldn't be able to do it as a glass pour. It would be like a $26 retail bottle.
I love Gamay with tomato. So I think Sigrid was right on the nose with this one. It has some of the Pinot characteristics, but that Gamay really pairs well with the tomato and the spices and the acid.
Gamay is one of Courtney, our head bartender's, favorite grapes. So we almost always have a Beaujolais on our glass pour option.
It's been a much maligned and misunderstood grape for a long, long time. In fact, it's because of the Beaujolais Nouveau trend that marketed only one expression of that grape, but now you see a lot more Gamay on the market, which is a relief for chefs who love pairing with it.
And the Nouveau is not the best way to experience the Gamay. It's too young. They're forcing it to get the first Nouveau out, but it's not
a headache in the glass. It's so high in sugar. It hasn't, had really the full experience of becoming the wine that it's capable of being. So you're basically drinking something that's not ready yet, and then you feel bad the next day.
But then I also fall into the marketing where I feel like I need to have, Beaujolais Nouveau on Thanksgiving, because I fall into that marketing of like, well, it just came out. I want to be the cool kid who has.
Well, you can still have wines from Beaujolais that aren't the Nouveau. There's, a lot of other good choices there too. But, if that's what people want, sometimes we have to make that choice, right?
And that's also my excuse to have more than one bottle of wine on Thanksgiving. Just.
You got to start with that one and then work your way to the one you want, right?
That's it. So unless there's other questions, or Chef, is there anything else that you want to talk about projects that you're working? I know you just got back from Mexico. You have some other trips coming up. You do so many cool things. I follow you from every account I have, because you're doing so many amazing things. I think, Aisha, do you mind just dropping in those two Instagram accounts? Chef, your personal one, is that okay to share as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Chef_Evan is my Instagram. And you can follow the restaurant, Black Trumpet, on Facebook. I don't really do Twitter anymore, but I'm Fun Guy Chef on Twitter. And just a couple things about what's going on here. I have formed a 501c3 that is a nonprofit that is now an umbrella organization for all of the project work that I do, in collaboration with a lot of really other talented people. One of those events we do is called Farmacue, and it's an event on a farm. It changes farms every year, where up to 50 chefs from our area present food. Some of them collaborate on it, and then we have a lot of nonprofits that are there as well, and it's all out in a field on a farm. We've been doing it now for over a decade, and it's a really cool event every June. So this year, I believe it's June 23rd Sunday in June. And then another event that we do is called BIPOC Fest, which is a celebration of our culture in Portsmouth and some of the marginalized communities that aren't always present when we do events like Taste of the Nation. So all these great, what we used to call ethnic restaurants in our region come out to that event. And last year we had 950 people there. So that's in a parking lot in Portsmouth. And anyway, we created this nonprofit called Cultivate that is now going to allow us to be our own fiscal agents and have everything kind of under one roof. Which is a big step. And then the other project I'm working on is opening a culinary school. So there are some things on my plate right now for sure.
That is awesome, Chef. Both of those things are amazing. I didn't know about the culinary school though, so I look forward to
it's a certificate program at a local community college, because we just have so few affordable options for people to pursue the culinary arts in this country right now, and we need it desperately, as we've all been through staffing crises over the last year. So that's my solution, is to try to get educating some young people or old people, we don't really care, what their age is, as long as they want to cook. So
Governor Mills just recently, maybe last year, I don't know time anymore, but I'm going to say recently, put a program in for the next, I think, 2 years. The community colleges are free for graduating.
right, yeah, I saw that. It's amazing.
And the culinary school at Eastern Maine has the largest enrollment they've had in a decade as a result of that, which is huge
Cool.
for us. Like that gives
I
us,
mean, all it took was for someone to pull that off, and you just have to build the field and they will come, right?
Yep. Quick question from Sean. He says, Bob, can you ask real quickly, frozen versus fresh products? When people freeze vegetables that they grow during the grow season in Maine and then try to use them throughout the year versus canning or preserving or anything else.
Yeah, so I'm a big advocate for fermentation because of what it does to our guts and for our overall well-being. So I do a lot of that. I don't do a lot of freezing, and one of the reasons for that is with a fresh ingredient, freezing has puts the plant through the same process as cooking it, meaning it will break down the cell walls and release liquid that you will never, when you reconstitute that frozen vegetable, it's never going to be exactly the same as it was fresh. That doesn't by any means mean that you can't freeze something either that's already cooked or that is raw and then cook it. If you're cooking the bejesus out of it, you're never going to know that its cell walls were broken down before you cooked it. So so that's just the only cautionary thing I would say is that your expectation of how you cook that ingredient has to change once it's been frozen.
Thank you. Anything else before we let Chef go? I know this is his family time and everybody else.
I'm an empty nester now. I can stay all night. My wife just went to Ireland, so but I do have to clean out my kitchen and go home eventually.
So just for stuff that we have going on, our next event is not scheduled. Our next virtual event is not scheduled. We are working on something with Chef McFadden, but we're finding a date still for a few months now. So we're hopeful we can nail that down and get that on the books. He has a great book, a couple great cookbooks, but we hope to do something with him shortly. Other than that, we have our monthly wine dinners. We have a great menu at the restaurant right now that we're really proud of. Hope to see everybody soon. If you're not here, you're probably at Black Trumpet is my assumption on where you are. Chef,
I do hope some of you at Black Trumpet.
It was great seeing you. I know Andy and I have plans to get down and see you or see your team if we're down there on a Sunday. But we always appreciate you and your time. During the pandemic, you were a huge help to me, just as like a sounding board for ideas and just your energy and your encouragement and everything else.
We all needed each other, and you've been that for me too, Bob. So I'm equally grateful.
So, thank you. I appreciate you very much. So cheers to everybody. Stay safe, stay warm. I know it's going to get a little cold in Maine this weekend, but it's warm in the bistro. The ovens are on. It's very, very warm in the bistro. So hopefully we'll see you soon. Cheers to everybody. Thank you so much.